Hello and welcome to Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector, GenAI in Governance, the fourth episode in our third season produced by GovExec TV in partnership with the National Academy of Public Administration and ACT-IAC, the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council. I'm your host, George Jackson. There's a new report out from the IBM Center from the Business of Government drawn from a roundtable in Australia. The topic, Generative Artificial Intelligence. GenAI uses machine learning models to create new content like images, text, audio, and videos. How can it integrate effectively in government? Let's find out. Joining me today, Alex Richter. He is Professor of Information Systems at the Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Joining us bright and early there in the morning. Sir, welcome. Good to see you.
My pleasure, George. Thanks for having me.
And here with me on set, Dan Chenok, Executive Director, IBM Center for the Business of Government, a NAPA Fellow, and a former Senior IT Executive at the Office of Management and Budget. Always good to see you, Dan.
Great to see you, George. Thanks for the opportunity.
So, great report. I have it right here with me on set. Wonderful reading. A lot contained in here. I'd love just an executive summary for the audience, and I'll tee you up with a quote from it. The intent is providing a whole of government perspective. What does that mean? What went into this?
So the IBM Center, which works with academic experts around the world on topics of interest to government leaders, has done a series of reports over the last, I'll say, decade around implementation of artificial intelligence in government. At the same time, we've also worked with our leaders in Australia and our colleagues at the IBM Australia office and have done a series of roundtables around different issues in government improvement. And there were a number of discussions where AI became the center of focus. And around, last year to two, as GenAI, generative AI, has come more to the fore in the commercial sector, government's gotten more interested in its promise, potential, how to mitigate its risks, et cetera. And this is both in individual applications as well as across the board in terms of how does government handle this from a whole of government kind of enterprise perspective. So IBM brought together, the IBM Center for the Business of Government, brought together a series of discussions culminating in this roundtable with leaders in Australia, which Alex Richter agreed to serve as the author, and we're very happy about that. He did a fantastic job. And basically distilled the insights from that session and then drew on his other research to produce the report that hopefully will give lessons not just to Australia, but to draw on those lessons and help other governments advance.
What were some of the questions, Dan, that you were hoping to answer going in? What were some of the mission objectives for government that you wanted to take a sort of keen look at?
Yeah, so many people say that government bureaucracy is slow and cumbersome and has a lot of steps. And artificial intelligence in its sort of first form, what some people call traditional AI, has helped with automating common tasks. Generative AI can help government really develop scenarios, develop planning horizons, provide services more quickly at an individualized level. And so we wanted to explore how does government take this very powerful technology that has had significant impact in the consumer sector, and how do you apply that in a public sector setting where you've got large scale, high stakes decision making that affects people's everyday lives? How do you do that in a way that maximizes the benefits of generative AI and minimizes its risks? And that was the frame we went into the discussion with.
Alex, Dan teed you up early, sang your praises. Talk a little bit about the group itself, your role in navigating this discussion. Walk us through day of, on the ground, this wonderful group of experts. What did that look like, sir?
So as the name says, it was a round table, and was a nice atmosphere, very open conversation. I felt there was a lot of trust between the actors there. And there was a mixture of representatives from different agencies or ministries. My personal role was rather that of an observer, because I didn't want to promote my own research or what I'm doing there. I was rather there to learn and to listen and then try to bring it together. But being there was really helpful to get an understanding of the atmosphere there. And what I can say about the atmosphere was that it was a positive and open atmosphere. It was not driven by like concerns about the risks of generative AI. It was more about the potential and about the chances. And it was a very open conversation. I really enjoyed that.
As you tee that up and referencing this open conversation, what concerns did that group share about generative AI? What were they concerned about?
I think what makes generative AI quite special and exciting in a way, surprising maybe, is that so far we really saw IT as our tool and we were in charge, right? And we were in control. And generative AI sometimes really does things that surprises us, and sometimes it's funny, but it's also concerning, of course, also from a governmental perspective. So it feels there's when generative AI generates content, insights without constant human input, then we're a bit worried, like, how does it do that? Is it reliable? We have seen it's not always reliable, it hallucinates and so on. But who is accountable for this content and so on? And why does it respond in that way and not the other? So that's one of the primary concerns, that there's less control and to some extent own agency that it brings in. And then it's a quite disruptive technology. So what also my own research is about to some extent is that we see a blurring in the roles of, as I said, of agency. So what does a human do? What does AI do? So it disrupts established workflows and roles and creates uncertainties ultimately about, is my job secure, or will, like, it's quite impressive what GenAI can do. So will it replace my job or jobs in general? And then with these dynamics come a lot of questions around ethics. So I would call this ethical complexity. We saw about bias. There's a lot of discussions about fairness and transparency, and a lot of unresolved questions. And maybe that's also how I'd like to frame it, and how I perceive the roundtables. There's a lot of open questions. There may be concerns, but things that we just need to figure out together.
Some of those elements, Dan, are detailed in the report, includes recommendations. Talk about that point around ethics, around transparency, around explainability relative to GenAI. Why are those important? And how does the report advise agencies to do those things?
So first, it's important to think about governance of AI and bringing in people of different points of view, different roles in the organization, not just the technology team, like the chief information officer, but the program leadership team, legal experts, acquisition experts, because a lot of the AI and GenAI applications get developed by companies working with governments. So setting up sort of an integrated governance structure where you can get different points of view and align incentives around how do you implement an ethical program in GenAI that provides for transparency, protects privacy. How do you build those incentives into the work structure that people use, that developers use to develop the programs, that applies to the data, to make sure that the data that's coming into the AI application is accurate and reflects the state of the world, and you're not using sort of an unbiased or outdated data set that doesn't sort of show the reality of what the population that you're trying to serve is living with every day. And then transparency both has it's sort of a one-way and two-way kind of a characteristic, in that you want people to be able to understand and have the AI be explainable so that people can sort of understand what's happening. You also want them to be able to comment and to help improve the application. It's almost, in the technology world, we would call this a sort of a tenet of agile technology, where you sort of get users to give you feedback. So as you're developing applications, You want to have the users involved. All of these can be brought together in a governance framework, and many of them were part of the discussions in Australia.
That point that you made on bias has come up several times throughout the course of the first 2 seasons of this content. And I guess what I want to get to as a question is artificial intelligence, one of the huge points of promise for it is speed. In government, speed to mission. Are those two things mutually exclusive? Like, can you deliver speed without sacrificing that focus on avoiding bias in sort of the data analysis that you're producing? Can those two things be executed at the same time?
Right. So any technology can be implemented well and accelerate speed to decision making, speed to service, or poorly, with bureaucratic hurdles in the way and confusing application interfaces and user interfaces that are clumsy to a citizen trying to interact with government. So one of the goals of this report and of our larger program is to how to make those two goals that you're describing, speed to service, and then by reduction of bias, synonymous. That you can deliver a faster and a better service. You can get more information quickly to get services to more people in a timely way, while at the same time, there are a number of government programs, especially those that give financial benefits, where there's risk of fraud, of the bad guys coming in. And AI can be used to not only get service and to the citizen, the vast majority of citizens who are deserving, but also to sort of catch the bad guys more quickly, if you will, and identify where there are those risks, and how do you understand where those threat vectors are coming from and address those. So cybersecurity can in fact be enhanced in that sense if you use AI properly.
Alex, Dan's touched on this to some degree already: cost savings, speed, etc. But walk our audience through some of the benefits that you gleaned from that group relative to generative artificial intelligence and its impact on government.
Yes, of course, George. Yes, as you said, Dan has already mentioned the speed. He has also mentioned, in a way, the decision making, which is not just about speed, but also about like improvements, making better informed decisions by having more information available. Efficiency for sure plays a role, but I would like to point out two key benefits that I see around generative AI. So one is when it comes to service delivery. I think AI opens some new channels to personalizing and improving citizen interactions. And that's something that in order to implement that, we will need to create trust and again have transparency and so on, things that we discussed. But I see huge potential there, or not just either. It was clear in the roundtable that the actors at the roundtable saw that too. And the other one is innovation. I think that there's new ways now of leveraging existing resources via AI, just because it helps us to perform these tasks. So these are two key benefits that I see.
One of the benefits for me reading this report, Dan, was the section on use cases. I learned a great deal. I'd love for you to talk a bit about some of the use cases that you took a look at. And one that I'd call out specifically is this scenario planning. Had not run into that before. Don't really know how artificial intelligence applies to it. Could you walk our audience through that?
Sure. So any business, if anybody's been sort of in a business planning type setting, government agencies, you do strategic planning, you often spend a lot of time gathering information from the past, gathering data to set up the scenario and to give you sort of understandable paths forward from different actions. And so you kind of, in a scenario planning exercise, you often model out, well, if we do this, what will happen? And you kind of learn from the past. It often took a lot of time to do that, to set up the scenario. AI can help you kind of understand the world and gather information much more rapidly and develop sort of draft scenarios that humans can then look at to refine their decisions. That's a really important point, and Alex touched on this. It's not that AI is replacing the work of people. It's that it's enabling them to make higher order decisions by automating some of sort of the common analysis that has to get done to create a scenario, and enabling people to have that higher level discussion around, all right, if this, then what then? And okay, so now we have much more information, much richer information than we would have been able to do if we had been sort of setting up that scenario by hand. Another use case that among several that the report talked about was this idea of service delivery and AI sort of accelerating time to service. And one that we haven't talked about today is around public safety and the use of artificial intelligence to, again, understand patterns so that if you are dealing with some sort of government service where, again, there's sort of a threat somewhere, you want to use technology, and AI is a significant example of this in recent years, to let large amounts of legitimate information and legitimate traffic flow through, and then to be able to understand and spot patterns and anomalies that can interrupt that service. And so it's really a tool to get more benefit to people that deserve it quicker, and to then mitigate risks in that program that, many government oversight agencies have documented risks to benefits programs over time, and it can help hopefully reduce those risks.
In that scenario planning, what's the primary application, would you say? Is it largely for training purposes? Is it for having different options if something does come across your desk as a government executive? Like, how does that scenario planning kind of roll out for an organization?
Well, it can be for training, right? You can do to help people understand as they're learning their new roles or teams working together. How do you do that? It can also be a powerful support mechanism for emergency managers who are learning from the past to be able to predict what might happen if something were to occur in the present or the future, in terms of, let's say, a cyber incident or a healthcare episode that might affect a large population. Generative AI can help gather information about not just sort of what happened, but what happened when a certain incident occurred in a past scenario. So you can learn from, all right, if we see that particular reacting mechanism come up now, we know that it could lead to these three things because we saw that happen before. And so we're much better able to integrate a lot of that information and help managers, especially in like an emergency situation, react and be much faster in responding to and providing service for those affected by the emergency.
It's fascinating what he says there, Alex, and it really strikes me that we're poised to have government move well beyond chatbots or using generative artificial intelligence simply for document creation or refining. It brings me back to your earlier points on trust. Talk strategy and trust. How can governments improve trust in generative artificial intelligence so that that type of, really sophisticated scenario planning is received in the right way?
Yes, so I have mentioned transparency already a bit, but I will mention it again because I think it's really key. We need as much transparency, like sharing with citizens what is happening there, what we know, potentially also what we don't know, and what we are working on. Another point. And by the way, this transparency also includes having citizens in consultations and advisory panels, for example, and really being open to suggestions. I mean, it's clear that we're navigating some uncertainties there. So the best way forward is actually and citizens know that. How coming back to the notion of speed, we see the developments, we see how quickly we have new versions of AI that do things differently than others. So it's clear that we need to be quick, but we also need to acknowledge some uncertainties. I want to bring in another term, value. So I think it's important to emphasize a value-driven approach. AI is global, but it's also in a way local, because the local governments make different or may make different decisions into where they allow AI being used or not. And there are, and speaking from New Zealand now, there are globally, as an immigration country where many values in a way merge and mix. There are different interpretations of what is inclusivity, what is bias, what is fairness, and so on. So talking openly about it and emphasizing that for government, that they hear the citizens, that they hear the community, and try together with them to define a set of values that informs AI, I think is very important to show the citizens that they're still in a driving seat. Also, as mentioned before, AI has some own agency, so it's important to make this clear that there's guardrails around it.
Put that through a U.S. lens for me, Dan. I mean, recent studies, recent reports find that trust in U.S. government may be at historic lows right now. Relative to a country like China, it appears to be going up, though you may be skeptical of those findings based out of some of the numbers coming out of that country on a regular basis. Add to that, talk about the unique challenge for the U.S. in building trust, building transparency around GenAI.
Well, as you alluded to, and as Alex talked about, it's a global issue. And I was speaking a couple of months ago at an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development meeting with a number of different countries that had similar questions for their own citizenry. And I think some of the things we touched on around effective delivery of service in a way that people understand and feel that they can participate in, that they they see that the government's acting on their behalf, that when AI is used to develop policy, to analyze what happened before and develop policy about what could come next, which is another part of the planning exercise, that there's some tie back to their lives, that's going to be much more accepted and build trust, because they'll see that the government's acting on their behalf. The other thing that often citizens see is that government might go off and do something that sounds really interesting but doesn't really go anywhere. And this is sort of this balance of experimentation and risk management, right? If you have a government that's doing a lot of experimenting, but it's not leading anywhere, the citizens thinking, well, are they really spending our money wisely? So having the incentives to, as the best companies do, learn from different iterations of a development of an application that's being used to provide service or protect the public in different ways, and then being transparent about how are we developing these experiments into a model that's useful, into creating what's called an NAF, a large language model that can really serve citizens at a large population level. How do we develop that in a way that builds trust and doesn't have the citizens think that, oh, the government's just sort of spending our money and I don't really know what's going on in this kind of AI black box, making things explainable.
You have always worn a lot of hats, and many of those hats are really rooted in this relationship between the public sector and the private sector. NAPA may be one, ACT-IAC another, certainly the IBM Center for the Business of Government. How are public-private partnerships important to what you outline there?
Yeah, so this is really key, especially where you have a lot of innovation happening across the commercial sector that the government can learn from. And it's sort of, I'll call it a front end and a back end kind of effect. So at the front end, for decades, the government has funded the advancement of basic technology. The Advanced Project Research Project Agency, DARPA, other National Science Foundation, Department of Energy have funded some really transformational technologies, and even in artificial intelligence are funding really interesting developments. And you're seeing new developments in quantum computing, which we'll be talking about in a few years in terms of its relationship with government. So having a government-funded industry sort of researched partnership where companies are working with governments to do the kind of experimentation. That's sort of the front end that I'll call. And then there's sort of the back end service delivery, right? Government should be providing the requirements, the needs that it's hearing from citizens in an accountable fashion, and then working with industry through basically through acquisition processes that align incentives properly so that companies can be building applications, algorithms, AI development in the future around different systems that meets those requirements in a way that reflects commercial best practice, which can be done by companies under contract. It can be done by industry experts who come into government through programs like the U.S. Digital Service. And it can be done through public-private partnerships in third-party forums like the ones that you mentioned.
Was there a fair amount, Alex, of excitement in that group and that discussion that you navigated? I mean, Dan leaned into the word innovation, and innovation is really exciting. Were there pockets of innovation that you uncovered?
I would say so. In terms of so innovation for sure is an important in the context of AI, as far as if we talked about speed, and we need to find ways to keep up with the developments, and we cannot assume that at some point we will have a stable state and now we can finally do something. We need to make sure that we constantly catch up. And what was discussed quite a bit in this roundtable, at this roundtable, was that we need to encourage experimentation within a safe regulatory framework or space. But we need this experimentation to be able to see the full potential. And then once we have identified, and you touched upon use cases already, so which are really a great tool, also in my opinion, to show benefits, but also to make people aware of risks depending on the use case. So once we have identified these use cases, also sometimes as part of experimentation, then we're able to scale applications and use cases up and promote them in a broader sense.
I'm going to latch on, Dan, to that word safe. You know, translating for government, it may be risk mitigation or risk management. Talk about protecting against the misuse of artificial intelligence. What does the report pinpoint on that topic?
Yeah, so it really walks through the series of risks that can occur in the development and use of an AI application, in a generative AI application. So there's risks that you're going to get the model wrong because you use data that's no longer accurate relative to the people that you're trying to serve. There are risks that the program team that learns from the data and sort of trains the AI, which is a term of art, isn't sufficiently diverse to kind of reflect the set of characteristics that represent the user population. So you want to have a team that has, represents different points of view, and so you don't get a sort of a single view of the world that can vector AI in a certain direction and not serve particular individuals. Then there's the risk of sort of malicious intent. Once you put an AI application on a system, is there a cybersecurity element? And that's what I talked about earlier about, you want to really think about building cybersecurity and as part of the application. And then finally, there's sort of how do people interact with the program? If people can't really figure out how to use and benefit from the AI program, well, they're not going to use the program very much, and you're going to have spent a lot of money of taxpayer money on a government program that doesn't get a lot of use. So thinking about the user interface is a risk that isn't really a security risk, but it's more sort of a risk in terms of effective ROI for the tax dollar,
Yeah.
in sort of how you get that application out into currency and used by the maximum number of people.
So Alex, talk next steps with me for the folks who are interested in leveraging the potential of GenAI in their organizations. What should they be doing right now? How do they responsibly begin to implement GenAI?
So it's kind of a wrap up, I would say, of things that that I have already mentioned. So the first thing is the values. So I think it's important to work together to design a clear value set. And the big question, in my opinion, shouldn't be how can we, like, technically or potentially use generative AI. It's really how we want to use it and how do we want to work together and how can generative AI support us. So defining these values and prioritizing fairness, equity, transparency, and other also society values, I think will help us to actually, well, as I said, get what we want, but will also help to reassure citizens, and will create a more buy-in and commitment. And hand in hand also with this goes is making sure that we develop what is often called AI literacy. So we want to make sure that people, that citizens, but also that government officials, before they decide how to use it, that they are are able to make informed decisions. So again, this is a bit tricky because there is not one stable state. So we constantly need to update our knowledge of what AI can and cannot do, where the risks are, and how we can govern these structures. But it is for sure important to invest in infrastructure and training in that regard. And the same way, we need to constantly align AI and AI use with existing frameworks and potentially need new frameworks where the existing frameworks are not clear enough about what we should and shouldn't do.
One of the bigger recommendations or findings contained in the report, Dan, from my reading, was establishing an AI governance office. Is that something new? Does that already exist in certain agencies by a different name? Like, what is that and what would it look like in practice?
Yeah, well, it's more establishing the governance framework that has particular elements, bringing in people from different backgrounds, different offices, user interface, good acquisition strategy, engagement in terms of ethical considerations and applying ethics throughout that. Different organizations, different ministries in Australia or agencies in the US will apply that through different people. Some agencies will have the chief information officer, the CIO lead. Others will see it more as like a deputy secretary responsibility. It's more about how the function gets done and making sure that you have the right people in the room, because the person who's sort of responsible for the government's going to not necessarily be at the same positional level in the agency, but making sure that all of those key decision makers are there and involved in governance of the things I mentioned, but also of making sure you get good data sets, as Alex mentioned, making sure you have skill sets. And then the last thing I'll say is, it is a technology. It's got to work with the agency's technology kind of foundation. That, it's got a lot of legacy. Most agencies have legacy systems that are delivering services every day. You want to introduce AI in a way that complements and adds to the agency's technology infrastructure, so that it serves citizens effectively and not basically cause problems in that existing delivery infrastructure.
Well, we've certainly had the right people in the room today. I've been talking with Dan Chenok, Executive Director, IBM Center for the Business of Government, and Alex Richter, Professor of Information Systems at the Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. Thanks to you both.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. I hope you're as excited as I am to continue exploring AI in the public sector. Join us next week, March 4th, same time, same great place for Episode 5, Election Security and AI. The 2024 elections concluded relatively smoothly, but they also stressed the growing importance of identifying threats, managing misinformation, and supporting electoral integrity. A trio of experts from CIS, the Center for Internet Security, will be here to talk about that newly hybrid environment. For GovExec TV at our Watergate studios in Washington, D.C., I'm George Jackson. Have a great day.